All right, welcome. Digital Roundtable is on. It is Wednesday, June 9th. Lots going on to talk about. My favorite vehicle is in the market almost. And we have a great guest. But let me first go to our John Butler. John, I don't know, I forgot to ask you, you got your guitar nearby?
Certainly I do. Would you like a song?
Absolutely, John. Get us in some energy, smart energy mood. Smart energy mood.
Why don't you help me take this call? See, the number on the matchbook is old and faded. How you doing, sir?
Excellent. How are you doing today, sir?
I am fine. We're having some interesting weather. It's been raining a lot. Of course, ERCOT is in the news. We have not, the grid has not left the news. It's heavily in the news. And of course, we passed some legislatures. A lot of the legislature passed a lot of bills relating to ERCOT. And of course, what's interesting is that this is the first time in the history of the world that the grid is front and center, you know, in politics. Usually people just want their lights to come on. Austin is accepting everybody gracefully from all over the world, most of California. I read in the paper where the average cost of a house was overbid by $200,000 from its worth. There's lots of things happening, but it's good to be here. I played in my golf club's match play and got beaten at match play, but I had a great time.
I was going to ask you actually before we keep going real quick, what's your thoughts of Nicholson winning a Grand Challenge at age of 50?
I think it's a great thing. It lets you know that golf is the only sport in the world where a 50-year-old man can beat an 18-year-old man. So what a country.
That's right.
It's not actually an East Texas game. I believe it originated in Scotland.
That is correct. That is correct, Llewelyn. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well. Things are beautiful here in East Texas. You know where East Texas is. That's the bit that's not under ERCOT. It's in the, you realize that, of course. It's also sometimes known as New England, but that's a misidentification.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes what's going to happen with the New England identity now that Brady lives in Tampa. But other than that, thanks for being here, sir. And we have a great guest today, Gary Radcliffe. Gary, how are you, sir?
Doing well.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let me introduce you formally. Gary Radcliffe is a professional engineer. He's most recently the VP of Market Development and Innovation of North America for Hitachi ABB Power Grids. Hitachi ABB Power Grids is a new combination of Hitachi and ABB. It's carve out of the ABB Corporation into the Hitachi company, and they have created a superpower, the power grid business. And we're excited to have him here. And obviously the company has a phenomenal history, both on the Hitachi side and the ABB side, in the Asian markets and globally, obviously. And they are, you know, they do manufacture, service, and sales of all kinds of equipment. They do lots of R&D in the power industry. And they have a presence in over 90 countries. And before that, Gary did join the new birth company from the ABB side, where he was the VP of Smart Grids. Gary has received an MBA from the Tepper School of Business, Carnegie Mellon, and he also received a Bachelor of Science and Master's degree in Electrical Power Engineering from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I'm not sure if I said that correctly, but welcome, Gary. Welcome to the program.
Great. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let me get it rolling here. We were talking to each other before things got going, and it seems like COVID is more and more under control, where the number of deaths keeps crippling down, which is a good thing, but it's still one more death is too many. So we continue to send our prayers and thoughts to all those that continue to lose folks due to COVID. In terms of the cases, they seem to also slowly trending down. And then the vaccination, we have administered, according to the CDC, more than 300 million Americans. That number is trending down. We are going to probably hit a plateau there pretty soon. Seems to be like a significant number of the population does not want to take the vaccine. But in the Carvallo household, everybody has. So happy to say that we are feeling back to normal in many ways. The stock market and the economy seems to be steady. Lots of expectations of big growth in the second half of the year. The month of May added 600,000 new jobs. So we have, since May of 2020, added a total of 13.9 jobs, 13.9 million jobs. So we're still about 6 million short that we lost during the shutdown. Unemployment in May went down to 5.8%. So I think things are pretty good, I would say. John, what's your take on COVID in the economy?
Isn't it interesting how, as we move into EVs, we're coming out of a pandemic? Isn't it interesting how we have traced all of the business models that would be based on the result of the pandemic? So I think what's happening is that, of course, the job market the number of jobs will be created increases, but of course it will struggle. As you know, we are struggling now with people going back to work. We heard this morning where it's difficult flying now because we don't have enough people at airports to get people along their way as they go through the search procedure. We know that there are restaurants where people are not refusing to come back to work. We know that workers also are struggling with the whole idea, can they really make somebody take the vaccine? Or is it still an option? Or if somebody in the office has not taken the vaccine, can they continue to work there? But more importantly, as we said earlier in the show, the business models are changing. New enterprises are being invented. And the most interesting thing is the emergence of EVs out of this pandemic. Usually we look at new technologies, maybe emerging out of a war, like after World War I, World War II, the application of airplanes to the civilian job corps. So it's interesting to watch. And I will conclude it as this: the bifurcation of what the stock market is doing and what the real economy of goods and services is doing is very, very interesting. So it is a case study, if you will, in how technology would continue to change our business models. And for the first time, the grid is right at the center of that. So there's lots of technologies on the grid edge. There's a lot of talk about automating the grid. Lots of things are going on, especially as EVs are continuing to prop up, if you will, in the economy. So I think for the most part, we got to get the gig economy back to working. And we also need a safety net, as I've said, for that grid economy, for the gig economy, in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Llewelyn, what are
Well,
your
it
thoughts?
grieves me to agree with Johnny, but I'm obliged to compliment him on his analysis, which I think is pretty well correct. I think that there is instability and doubt. I think there's doubt coming out of Washington because of the inability of the Biden administration so far to strike a deal on infrastructure. I think there's doubt going around the financial world about the apparent emergence of inflation. We seem to see many signs of inflation, and I'm deeply perplexed by the unemployment figures because there is a labor shortage. I took the trouble to sign up on the labor market here in Providence, Rhode Island, or close to Providence. And I get all these lists of jobs. Some are very insistent that I really should sign up and come to work. And they're not the lowest end jobs, and they're not the highest end. And they're fairly well paid compared with what I anticipated. A lot of them are drivers, some of them are warehouse people, but there's a fair variety of jobs really begging to be filled in a state that is not on the whole prospering and which came out of the pandemic, like number 50 in development. It hasn't done terribly well. It's rather stagnant. And yet there's a labor shortage, which is extraordinarily interesting. And we need to take a look and see what is going on, that we have these labor shortages. I'm surprised that we also have housing inflation, but ours, unlike yours, is not $200,000 above a reasonable price. It's $100,000 above a reasonable price for a modest house. So there are stresses. All these things amount to being stresses. And stresses have results, but what those results are going to be is unclear. Whether the stress will produce inflation, whether the stress will in fact curb the rate of growth, which looks very optimistic at the moment, we don't know. But it's a time to be a little bit cautious, sanguine but cautious, I would say.
Yeah, great. Gary, you work for a company that is very global, and you're probably still telecommuting from home, but get a sense from talking to the east and the west every day, probably of work-related issues and what's going on. And so tell us what has been the impact of COVID, if any, at ABB or the new Hitachi ABB, and in the marketplace that you call into, the utilities. Any lessons learned, anything that we could that you could share about things that maybe were unexpected that are working incredibly well? And do you see things going back to normal? And how is the economy? Is the economy good, well, stable? Give us a sense from your point of view.
So from my point of view, we've been able to weather the pandemic fairly well. We were able to keep our factories open. I think there were some issues around supply chain, and we're seeing that across the economy today, where we're seeing shortages. John mentioned EVs and vehicles. The power electronics and the chips for vehicles has been a major supply chain issue. So we're still seeing that. I think actually right now we're coming out of the pandemic faster than people expected. And that's why we're seeing the supply chain shortages. And also we're seeing companies not yet prepared to handle the volume of business, whether it's screening at the airports or as people get back out once they're vaccinated. I think this startup of the economy is happening faster than what we expected. In terms of utilities in the industry, power consumption has remained pretty much stable after the initial downturn in consumption and a little bit of a shift to the residential sector from the commercial and industrial sector as people started working out of their homes. So in terms of utilities, I think they're now on the rebound with the growth coming back. I think what's really interesting, though, is the energy transition has really taken hold during the pandemic. There's more focus on, reducing carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emission initiatives at the state level, utilities and states, planning to be carbon free by 2050 or sooner. And that's having a ripple effect into the utilities. And what we have seen is with the economics is that there's not an economic price to pay today to move to renewable generation. Basically, solar and wind are now reaching parity with other generation sources. And that's a real dynamic in terms of our industry and change that we're facing. And, electric vehicles, that's one element of electrification. So we're seeing more focus on electricity as the end use consumption of energy. And that also reinforces the need for the grid. We're seeing, demand for more transmission infrastructure. Hopefully that'll be incorporated into the infrastructure bill that's being considered, because transmission with renewable generation, it addresses the two major challenges. One is, where is this renewable generation located and how do we get that power to the load center? And then there's also the timing of renewable generation. You know, solar PV peaks in the middle of the afternoon, which doesn't align with evening peaks, such as what California has. And so being able to move power facilitates some of those concerns that we have with renewable generation and managing that integration. So as we come out of COVID-19 and we look at investment in the economy, we're hopeful that there will be investment in the transmission grid, and utility infrastructure will be able to participate in those investments. So I think we're doing okay, you know, coming out of the pandemic. I think we have a real opportunity around the energy transition and take advantage of that as we make infrastructure investment.
But let me follow up. You mentioned, yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, John. Go ahead.
You mentioned supply chain, and we know that we learned during the pandemic that the supply chain mostly came from other countries, mostly came from China. And if you look at the strain on the supply chain, and as we have tried to not manipulate the supply chain, but literally get more manufacturing back in America. How do you see this in the future? That is, the relationship between the strain on our supply chain and the fact that we really make very, very little stuff in America and going forward, especially for your industry.
So I think there's going to be a balance there, John. So we have a lot of manufacturing, which is located in the United States and also in North America, because we have some facilities, for example, in Canada and Mexico. So we do a lot of local manufacturing, but we also have technologies that we support in other countries globally, not necessarily from China. And so we're in a global economy. I don't think we're going to be able to get 100 away from that. We'll still be both importing as well as exporting as we go forward. But I think maybe, you know, again, this is not my area of expertise, but I think reliance on one particular country is maybe not a position that we want to be in for a lot of sourcing of some of our critical infrastructure. We also have been participating in the supply chain initiative coming out of the Department of Energy in terms of security of supply chain for power grid equipment, and making sure that, you know, we're providing secure and safe technology to the industry. And I think that's also an important component of the supply chain. So I guess to some, we do manufacture here in the United States. We also do have global manufacturing, and, you know, we try to balance where it's most effective and where we have the resonant technology to make sure that we provide best value to our customers. But we recognize, you know, with supply chain and shipping, and, you know, there are risks associated with that. We also need to make sure that we're providing, you know, the cybersecurity and physical security of products to make sure that we can also meet our customer requirements. But I don't think the global economy is going away.
Thank you.
That's very interesting. I'd like to preface my question by just saying the one unknown thing is, as we return to work, what will happen to real estate? Will there be a real estate slump, which is very hard to have a prosperous society when real estate is slumping, and that's commercial real estate, offices, shops, etc. And I'd like to ask Gary, just for the benefit of our viewers and myself, what are the products that you offer? Hitachi is a very large company.
Okay, so I can answer the products. If you want me to comment on the real estate, I can maybe give you my opinion on that.
Oh, let's have both. Let's have both.
All right, I'll start with the easy one, the real estate. Right now, my home price is skyrocketing because there's demand for homes. So we've seen very high appreciation in my neighborhood for homes. I think that's great. In terms of commercial real estate, I think companies are trying to determine what their policies will be as people return to work. I know that companies are taking different approaches, allowing workers that are interested in doing so to stay at home and continue to work remotely. We're seeing also implementation of hybrid solutions, part-time in the office, part-time at home, and people going back to work full-time back in their offices. I think it's still early to tell how that's going to sort out on a permanent basis. There's arguments on both sides, better collaboration if you have people in the office, but you can be more productive if you're at home. So I'm not sure how that's going to sort out and what impact that may or may not have on commercial real estate. To answer your other question in terms of what does our company supply, we're the largest provider globally for power equipment, the products, the systems and services associated with grid equipment, and also for industrial customers who are large users of energy and power, like mining, for example, oil and gas. The products we do provide is we're the largest provider of power transformers globally, going from large generation step-up units all the way down to the pad mount transformer that might be sitting at the corner of your yard. We have high voltage equipment, primarily switchgear and gas insulated substation equipment for the power grid. We have a group called Grid Integration, which takes our products and deploys those in turnkey solutions. And that includes high voltage DC, it includes FACS, which is flexible AC transmission systems, things for providing more resilience to the grid in terms of STATCOMs, SVCs, synchronous condensers, battery energy storage, and those technologies. And then we have a grid automation group, which provides enterprise software systems to utilities. This could be asset management, field service management, asset performance management, energy portfolio management, as well as a network control software for the grid. This would be supervisory control and data acquisition, SCADA, energy management systems, advanced distribution management software, including outage management and automated switching and managing voltages and reactive power losses on distribution circuits, distributed energy resource management, energy markets, the software. Actually, the software for ERCOT is provided by my company for the market systems and also the SCADA EMS system. And then we also have communications and substation automation, the grid automation business.
Thank you very
Brilliant,
much.
brilliant.
I'm almost sorry I asked you.
Well, you did ask.
Well, let me follow up. It's obvious doing great things in software. What do you think about the fact that the grid is not totally automated now? And as your company looks forward to the, let's call it the automation of the grid, or the Andre Carvallo's automation of the grid, because we know that people are still kind of like pulling levers, and it's kind of where it was with computers 40 years ago. How do you see the grid really coming up to par with other kinds of industries in America in terms of the automation and what you do?
So I do think one of the big initiatives in the utility industry is really the overall concept of the digital grid, which includes different levels of automation. And that's a work in process. And there's really three components or three stages. And utilities in this country are at different levels, and there's not one path that you necessarily take to navigate the different levels. But the first level is moving from analog to digital. Right. And we have largely done that. When you look at smart meters, that's a digital meter versus the rotating disc type of meter, the electromechanical meter. So we've moved to smart meters. We have microprocessor-based relays. So now we have more software and control systems. Advanced distribution management systems are an example of that. We can do automated switching on distribution circuits to isolate faults and reconnect as many customers as possible. And we can automate that process if the utility is willing to put the safety procedures and has the communications to enable that. We can do the same thing for volt-var control on distribution circuits. That process can also be automated. But again, you need to have the communications infrastructure, and you need to have the smart devices. Digital substations have emerged. And this is really taking analog devices in the yard, converting those to digital, doing away with all the copper in a substation, and pulling back digital signals into the control house. Now we use digital relays and microprocessors in the substation, but the next wave is going to virtualize that and basically use a couple of computers for substation automation and control, where you have a primary and a backup, and everything is digital in the substation. What that enables you to do is also to collect performance and asset data from the substation, which can be used for monitoring the health of assets. And asset performance management is a growing digital application for utilities. And it's, you know, we started our application for asset performance management by capturing our subject matter expertise and embedding that into performance models. So not only do we monitor assets to know when something happens, but we want to know what has happened, and then even more importantly, why it happened. And then through the performance algorithms and the analytics, we can determine what's going on, the underlying cause, and what's the remedy to fix that. And you can actually start to move towards more autonomous, you know, debugging and, you know, application of the products, such as the automation, whether it's substation or distribution automation, and then also, you know, taking action to derate an asset, for example, because you know you have a problem an asset. We're starting to move more and more to those types of applications. Also with asset performance management, now we're doing things with, you know, artificial intelligence. We're using machine learning, two types of machine learning. One, you can train, you know, an algorithm to detect a potential problem and then flag that and recommend a remedy. Or you can detect an anomaly. You know, you may not know what the problem is, but you know it's not normal, particularly when you benchmark it against other assets. Also, part of AI is neural networks, which we're enhancing to do forecasting. Think about the models that we've developed over time in the utility industry to forecast load and demand, so we know what the requirements are going to be on the generation side. Well, now we have distributed energy resources, which include, as an example, solar PV at the distribution level. So when you look at the net load on the grid, that's changing depending upon the level of distributed generation that's feeding into the grid, which complicates the forecasting by an order of magnitude. And so now we're developing smarter neural networks, deeper neural networks, if you will, adding another layer or layers to address the renewable generation and distributed energy resources for load forecasting. So that's another example of what we're doing with the analytics. And then we're using more digital twins, and that's really getting towards that autonomous operation where you can simulate and model the operation of a wind generator or controls for a fax device, and be able to know what's normal and what's expected, and then monitor what's happening and take corrective action. And we're seeing more and more virtualization and more autonomy being embedded. Other things we're doing with asset performance management as well as virtual reality and augmented reality. So from a digital point of view, there's a tremendous amount of work going on. So it's not the same grid it was 10 years ago.
That's
Good.
very
Thank you very much.
interesting.
Yeah. Let me follow up. Let me follow up with that on Gary, because we don't get to have you every time, and there's a interesting serendipitous coincidence. So I'm a big fan of Ford and the Ford Motor Company, and Ford announced last week the Ford F-150 Lightning, in addition to some other electric vehicles they're coming out. And I don't know if all of you listening and you all here are aware of this truck, but it's a typical F-150. It's gorgeous. They have added some beautiful lights in the front and in the back. It comes with something called the frunk, which is a trunk in the front because there is no engine anymore. That has 400 cubic feet of. This is a truck that goes from 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. And it can tow 10,000 pounds. It's a state-of-the-art vehicle. It has a range, a base range of 230 miles and an extended range of 350 miles. 1,000 pounds. And so one of the interesting things about it in their features, I mean, they share so much in this announcement. It was an epic moment. I think is a watershed moment in the electrification of planet. The killer feature that I love, which is the reason why I'm going to own one of these trucks, you can write that to the bank, is that you can power your house for 4 days. It produces 9.5 kilowatts of power, and you can do tailgating. You can do all kinds of works out of it, run your saw and all that. So Gary, I know that you and I have talked about this for a long time, since my days at Austin, and we have been, nurturing the journey in our respective areas of work. Walk us through real quick, and again, we have all the time in the world. I wish we will, but walk us through what happens if 100 people in a cul-de-sac get this F-150 and they're powering the home and they're pushing energy back into the grid. But what does that grid look like, and what needs to be added or changed to make that work?
So when we look at adding the load associated with electrification, and in particular electrification of transportation, there's at a high level, there's two things that need to be looked at. One is the grid make ready, and then two is managed charging. And the grid make ready means, do you have the capacity, regardless of when the load occurs, do you have the capacity to meet that demand? And so you may need a larger transformer. Your example with everybody on a cul-de-sac owning an F-150, if they all decide to charge at the same time, you need to have, the grid needs to be able to meet that capacity. But the other side of that is, can you manage the charging? Can you manage to charge those vehicles so that you minimize the capacity in T&D system that you need? But then also, can you make sure that you manage the charging such that it doesn't contribute to the system peak demand? Because the capacity to deliver the power is a T&D issue. The capacity to have that energy available is a generation issue. So you want to make sure that with managed charging, you avoid charging those vehicles during peak demand on the grid. And then to the extent that you also want to manage the charging such that you minimize the pipe, if you will, that's feeding that cul-de-sac and the transformer that's feeding that cul-de-sac, regardless of when you consume, it has to meet the load that's there. And those are the two major issues. If we can avoid charging during peak demand, we may have local infrastructure requirements like the cul-de-sac, in terms of investment needed to support electrification, but we may not need that much more generation because we're filling in the gaps between peak demand and then the other demand periods. And I think that's a key thing. The other thing I would mention regarding electric vehicles, I'm a big fan of fleets. And the main reason I think fleets are going to, let me back up. The Ford F-150 EV is definitely a milestone. When the #1 vehicle being sold in the US goes EV or goes electric, it really sends a strong signal to the industry. And it's, in my mind, it's an example of a major car manufacturer, in some regards, trumping all these startups. Here's my EV, it's here today, it's now, it's a real truck. And that's going to change the landscape significantly. But that said, I think fleets are where we're going to get more rapid adoption because total cost of energy pencils out if you have a high utilization vehicle. And if you look at last mile vehicles or delivery vehicles going from a distribution center to retail or to end use customer, you can define those routes. You know the distance you need to travel, so you know what the battery requirements in the vehicle are. They come back to the depot at night, so you have a home base where you can charge them. And so you can optimize the charging, the vehicle route, the vehicle size, and electricity is cheaper than diesel. And so it makes sense because of the utilization. You more than save the initial upfront expense of the vehicle with the batteries and the charging infrastructure through the lower energy cost. And you recover that investment much faster because you're using that vehicle 10 hours a day. I mean, I have 3 vehicles sitting in my garage, and you know, they're idle 94% of the time. Certainly greater,
Yeah.
Certainly my utilization is definitely less than 10%, somewhere in the single digits. And so being able to recover that investment cost for the charging infrastructure and any premium for having an EV versus an internal combustion engine takes me longer to recover that. I think in the private market, like private light duty, I think the immediate application will be commuter vehicles, running errand vehicles. I think vehicles as the only vehicle in the house where people may be taking long trips, that's going to be a little bit slower in the adoption. I know we're trying to address that with corridor charging infrastructure and public charging infrastructure, but I think in the near term, it's going to be people buying second vehicles for running errands where the range is not an issue. They have a place to charge, and I think we'll see adoption there. But fleets, trash trucks, UPS, Amazon, FedEx, distribution deliveries, those vehicles.
School buses, school buses.
School buses, and actually school buses are a good example because you have a lot of dwell time with the school bus. So you actually don't even need that big of a charger for charging of school buses. And there's been a lot of work being done on using the school bus for vehicle to grid, as you mentioned, the F-150 providing power to a home if needed. The batteries can do that. The technology is there to do that for bi-directional. Today, most chargers for EVs are single direction or unidirection. So we'd have to make sure that one, the manufacturer of the vehicle is okay with the vehicle being used for vehicle to grid, is not going to void the warranty. And you also need to make sure that you have bi-directional so that you can not only charge it, but you can also supply energy from the vehicle. And that's something that's been looked at for the past 5-10 years. We've seen those applications. But no, I think fleets are exciting. We'll also perhaps see fuel cell EVs for heavy long haul trucks. That's also an emerging market.
Yeah, gentlemen, any follow-ups?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a couple of questions and one statement. My feeling is that the EV revolution will come rather faster because there's consumer demand. It may not come in rural areas or where there are long distances, but people in cities are very inclined towards them. They love the acceleration. They're absolutely extraordinary there. Their initial speeds are so high you practically get whiplash when you put your foot on the accelerator. I think that's coming. I think the manufacturers are anticipating it, and the charging infrastructure will catch up because somebody will find out how to make money out of charging. Maybe it's one of the dedicated charging companies working hand in glove with the utility. I think it'll come quite quickly, the way that air conditioning was really very quickly adopted once it was perfected after the Second World War. But I'd like to ask you about your confidence that as we digitize the grid and everything else, does that make it more or less vulnerable to cyber attack?
So I think the answer to that is as you increase the level of digitalization of the grid, you are potentially more susceptible to cyber attack. I mean, as you have more sensors, more access points, as you add more and more digital technology to the grid, it is going to make you more susceptible.
And when we're talking about susceptibility, there's some concern about the integrity of transformers made in China and whether they have back doors built in through their sensors. How do you ensure the integrity of your stuff supplied to you, that is your nameplate material like a transformer, but which may be made in China or some other country where we don't have so much confidence?
So we have the procedures in place similar to the work that was being done by DOE, specifically looking into this issue. I also know that the government has looked in specifically to Chinese transformers. I don't know the specific results of their investigation. I'm not even sure that's been disclosed.
I found great difficulty in getting the results. They grabbed one transformer that was destined the Washington Area Power Administration,
Right.
whipped it off to Sandia, and nothing has been heard.
Right.
So we don't know what was found.
But the key thing that we are focused on is making sure that our controls in monitoring for the assets, we have a secure supply chain, and we validate the cybersecurity measures and the hardening of those devices to make sure that we're not creating a susceptible point for utilities regarding our equipment. And we're working closely with DOE, as are other vendors, to make sure that our supply chains are secure, particularly from a cybersecurity point of view, that there's testing and compliance throughout our supply chain to ensure that we're not delivering any vulnerabilities to our customers. And then in terms of the operations, the utilities are responsible for operating secure grids. They're typically being hacked every single day, or attempted to be. So they're taking the implementing the cybersecurity measures to make sure that their systems are hardened. All the protocols are in place, so they can quickly, if there is any entry into their systems, it can be quickly identified and isolated. But they continue to focus on this. This is a major industry issue, and it is getting attention by the utilities, has been for some time, and certainly the government is looking into issues such as the supply chain issues and impact on cybersecurity. This is a program that we've been involved with at DOE, and so as have other vendors.
John?
Yes, my major question has to do with the driverless cars. These things are so very, very interesting as they come on board. As we look at what you call delivery vehicles and et cetera, and the biggest research there is, hey, how do we take the driver out of the seat to increase safety, including 18-wheelers, certainly including Domino delivery pizza, the great commercial on. So my question is, as you prepare for the future and as everything becomes connected, electricity becomes the center of what we do. It replaces, in terms of how we generate it, of course, whether it's gas or coal or whatever have you. So there will be a lot of connectivity. How do you think about all of this connectivity, including automobiles and including 5G and all of the Internet of Things that will be hooking up to the internet that will require electric power?
So I think, since we sell communication systems, I think it's great.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
It's a huge opportunity. For utilities, one of the things that we're seeing is investment in field area networks, specifically to establish connectivity to those devices that are between the substation and the meter, being the distribution circuit. But connected assets is a key investment area for utilities as they expand their digital footprint. I think the thing to look at is when you talk about, for example, the industrial Internet of Things, or IoT, there's three. This is very simple breakdown, but there's three components that you need. So one is, you do need that communications. You can't have connectivity or connected assets if you do not have communications. And then you need to have upfront software. So that software is either controlling, like an operational system, or it's capturing data for analytics and analysis. And then you need to have smart things. It's a sensor or it's a smart device that can be controlled and operated. So you need to be able to combine the software to manage communications for the connected, to reach the connected assets, that connectivity piece, and then you need smart assets in the field. And I think that's where there's a focus on IoT, digitalization. Digitalization is more the sharing of information across an enterprise, but we're seeing those investment areas. And so moving towards more autonomous operations, whether it's a vehicle, like I think there's a group of people who feel that autonomous vehicles are going to replace private vehicles because, you're sharing a vehicle. Whenever you need to go someplace, you type in, you enter something into your computer, an autonomous vehicle pops up at the end of your driveway and off you go. Maybe that'll happen. And, the goal is that's going to be an electric vehicle as well. So we'll have an EV autonomous vehicles, shuttling us about for those of us who live in the suburbs. But we're also seeing autonomous development for the grid. And, I mentioned automated switching to isolate faults, or automated switching of assets on the distribution circuit to control voltages and reactive power flow, automatically controlling set points on smart solar PV inverters. So that, the autonomous operation of the grid is moving forward, but it's going to involve that software, that communications and connectivity, and then those smart devices. I'm not sure if I answered your question or not.
Yeah, you did, but in the 1840s, a guy by the name of August Comte wrote a book entitled Social Physics. And he said that data will allow us to connect people together, and we'll be able to write the equations about the movement of people. So that social physics is just developing. It became sociology instead of social physics. But now the physicists have all the data that's being produced by the Internet of Things. And I think that August Comte's social physics is here. So not only do we have the Internet of Things, it's the marketing, how we find people, that becomes part of the equation.
No, I agree.
So
I also think, go ahead.
No, I was gonna real quick, a good question that came up here. We have several, but on the three elements that you describe as critical for this digitalization, sensors, communications, and the software that is the glue. Which one would you say is farthest ahead, or which one is lagging? Do you have a sense of that? Clearly 5G and high-speed broadband technologies on unlicensed spectrum is probably already here. But what's your sense of is any of the three lagging significantly, or are they all at par?
I would say from a technology point of view, I guess I would say they're on par. We have the technologies available for all three categories. If there's anything that's lacking, it's the deployment and expansion of communications network to be able to support all the different use cases and applications. And that's just a function of utilities prioritizing, what are the most important applications and making sure they have the communications infrastructure in place to do that. I don't think it's necessarily that the technology is lagging in one area or another. I do think it's prioritization by utilities. And what we have seen is there used to be siloed communication systems where there, utility having multiple divisions or operations, and each would have their own communications. Now we're seeing a more integrated approach to communications by utilities, recognizing that there's value across the enterprise to having communications infrastructure, and in building out based on an overall integrated plan, tackling those investments that will drive the most short-term value. I think that would be my sense in terms of the rollout.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you something, Gary, again, because you work for a global company and you've been around for a long time, and you are in charge of innovation. It seems like, the industry, because it is, maybe it's become exciting and cool, even though maybe 30 years ago it wasn't as cool as exciting. But I always found it to be, when I joined Austin Energy, that's been very cool. But clearly everybody talks about now EVs and energy and solar rooftops and all these things and DER. It seems like the innovation and the forces coming to the industry are kind of unstoppable. So I don't know if I wanted to mention for everybody's understanding that Amazon have done a soft launch on their new internet product. So Amazon is going to become an internet carrier, primarily first of Internet of Things, as they're going to deploy Wi-Fi and Bluetooth networks using 900 megahertz unlicensed spectrum. Their product or service called Sidewalk. And so here comes Amazon trying to connect everything. Qualcomm is just launched a significant number of new chipsets. 4 weeks ago, Volkswagen announced that they were going to manufacture their own chips in vertically integrating into their devices, into their products. It seems to me, again, and you guys, have all kinds of partnerships, and maybe there are things that you cannot share. But it seems to be like the big players, the big Caterpillars of the world, are all trying to integrate, which means to me that they're going to integrate or want to play a different role as it relates to the delivery of energy, the creation of energy. What are your thoughts on where this is heading?
So I think we're going to see different types and different levels of communication if I focus for a moment on the grid. So when we look at the utilities have a communication strategy for managing their equipment and delivery of power to the meters. And so I think we'll see utilities, at least in the short term, focusing on their communications infrastructure, making sure they're addressing enterprise level solutions, not discrete one-off types of communication solutions. And I think there's, whether they move to 5G, in a balance of fiber as well as wireless communications, I think we'll continue to see technology development and deployment there. I think the big and interesting component when you look at utilities is what we're going to do in terms of demand response, demand management. How do we get information to customers regarding the price of electricity? How do we shape consumer demand as we move to more renewables, where we actually dispatch customer demand to match the available generation? And that's getting into people's homes, and that's a whole different type of communications infrastructure. The internet may be a big portion of that, but ultimately, I think if we want to have responsive consumer base, we need to provide pricing signals in real time or quasi real time that customers can respond to. Or, as we talked about, there are systems in homes or systems in buildings that respond to a price signal and adjust the building or adjust the home accordingly. If the price is real high and it's critical peak pricing, a customer's air conditioning system shouldn't be coming on if we're going to manage our demand and be able to do it intelligently and have a in this case, it's going to be an automated grid that can adjust demand according to availability of renewable generation and what the spot market price is for the grid. And we're not that far away from that. And that's where I think the industry is going. And so that's going to be a different type of communications, because that's consumer-based communications. And we need to figure out how we bridge the gap between the utilities and the customer side of the meter, and whether there's aggregators involved and how that rolls out, I think is a work in process right now.
A couple of follow-ups real quick, and I know that we're running out of. I want to maybe trump the last 2 minutes on something. Gary, give us a sense for where is the grid architecture going. It used to be one-way power flow. We've been talking about the F-150 and everything. You guys did a lot of stuff related to Puerto Rico, and obviously what happened with ERCOT, with Snowmageddon, and there's all kinds of discussions now about the grid itself and how you harden the grid. Resiliency is a big deal. Where are the architectures and the concepts going around microgrids, islanding? What does the future look like?
So we see a future where the grid is as important in the future as it is today. We don't see the importance of the grid going away. Even if there is a portion of generation which is distributed generation, And that's going to have a role in the future, but that's going to be maybe 25%, 30% based on some of the forecasts I've seen. Even if it goes to 1/3 of the generation, that means still 2/3 of the generation is transmission connected, and we need to have the grid. There are some challenges because we're changing the generation mix. We're changing the location of the generation. Instead of being located on the outskirts of the city, it's now 30 miles offshore with wind generators. So that has some profound changes that we need to address in terms of both the timing of these renewable generation resources as well as the location of them. And so we need to be able to manage and compensate for that, because either we consume it where it's generated, we move it to a place where there is load, which means you need transmission, or you have to store it. So we're going to see storage be a big component of the future. And what we're advocating as part of our vision for 2050 is we will see carbon-free generation, solar, wind, hydro, and nuclear is still likely to continue to play a role. Today, nuclear is 20% of our generation here in the US. If you look at Canada, Canada is over 80% carbon-free generation today. Large hydro, some nuclear, and a little bit of wind and solar. So I think we're going to see the shift to carbon-free generation, and then we will see some two-way movement of power at the distribution level because of the distributed energy resources, and we need to have coordination between those resources and the centralized generation. Then I think hydrogen is also going to play a role, because if we can use green hydrogen, we can then store that for seasonal storage. We can put it into either a combustion turbine, because they're now developing a technology to use hydrogen in combustion turbines. We can put it into a fuel cell. We can move it, whether we truck it or move it in a pipe, to direct end uses such as fuel cell EVs or industrial processes or commercial uses, or even uses in the home. So I think we'll see a parallel energy path with hydrogen because of the storage capabilities it offers, and it also can be created using surplus renewable energy. So rather than curtailing renewable energy, we use it to convert to hydrogen. So I think going forward, the future will be a strong transmission grid. We'll have centralized renewable generation resources. We'll have a play with hydrogen, and we will also have some distributed generation. And your F-150, it gives you added resiliency in case you do lose grid power, or you can use it for peak shaving so that you can lower your bill, because you will be sensitive to the price of electricity, and you'll want to avoid consuming when the price is highest in the evening, and you can use your 40 EV for energy arbitrage. So that may be a thing of the future, but I think we'll see a strong grid. We'll see hydrogen emerging. We'll see storage. Will be carbon-free, will be automated, both the grid itself as well as customer assets as well.
Brilliant, brilliant. I could not plan for a better ending. Thank you. Any follow-ups, gentlemen, for Gary?
Well, for those of us who do tailgating at football games, the F-150 is nothing new. For the big screen TVs, but it's an interesting future because supply chains would change, but more importantly, the workforce will change. Different opportunity structures will be developed, and I think that there will be 400 plus people making electric cars in America. I think all of the big three will have to redefine themselves, just like Titleist did when the great golf balls came out, and they're all the same. They got to brand themselves. So I see a big change in the future, and the electricity is the future. It's always been important, but it's becoming more important now.
Yeah. Llewelyn?
I think the whole issue of resilience becomes a lot more important. And I'm wondering whether John Wellinghoff, who we've had on this broadcast, talks about actually breaking, the former chairman of the FERC, breaking the grid into smaller sections rather than more interconnection, in order to protect against interruptions like cyber attack or possibly some version of the Carrington effect with an external pulse hitting parts of the grid or all of the grid. So I think there are sort of philosophical as well as technical issues to be regarded for the future, but I think overall it's very optimistic. It's very much electric. Electricity is the future, but we have to make sure that every time the wind blows or it snows, that the grid doesn't go down, that we have resilience of supply and mean it. I think traditionally electric utilities have had a brilliant record of quick response. You've got to get rid of that philosophy of quick response into one of no need to respond, which is quite a step forward.
Yeah, yeah.
We need a
Well,
resilient,
go ahead.
carbon-free grid. No, I was just going to say,
Oh,
we need a
that's
resilient-
inevitable. That's inevitable. That's coming. It's going to be carbon-free. I wish it were more nuclear and less so-called alternatives, but because I think nuclear offers the best option for the longest term, for the cheapest power, and the least ultimate impact on the environment.
All right, the last question, Gary, and maybe you all have a thought on this. Do we have in a new electrification self-healing reality, everything beautifully described, functioning? Do we have today enough engineers, enough workforce, enough skills, enough talent to manage that world? Or are we lacking there? Are we lacking on the workforce side?
Well, it's no different than a change from the horse to the buggy to the automobile combustion engine. And then, of course, the workforce usually catches up in a lot of ways. But remember, I think that the automation of stuff makes stuff, it dumbs things down a lot. You know, you don't have to really fly an airplane, Llewelyn, like you flew an airplane, you babysit it. You know, from the helicopters that we use in Vietnam, they flew them, but I think they babysit the new ones. So I think that the workforce—
It's called systems engineering.
Yes, excuse me,
Professor.
engineering. Yes. So I think that the workforce will adjust, but it does take the craftsman, the person being a craftsman, is not the same kind of skill you need really to be a checkout person at a grocery store where you just put the grocery over the thing, it goes beep, 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 beep. So I think that the skilled workforce, quote unquote, will catch up.
Gary?
So, yeah, I think the industry has two challenges. One is there is an aging workforce that needs to be replaced. I think we have a bit of a gap between workers that are now coming in and you know, an aging workforce. That's been an issue in the industry for a number of years. And then the technology is changing, and I think utilities are, you know, being aggressive with, you know, the workforce development, whether it's retraining. We're actually, community colleges are playing a major role in retraining of the industry and employees, but also looking at the traditional universities and making sure that they have the feeder programs that meet the needs of utilities today. It is more technology, it is more digital, and there's still the nuts and bolts of running a grid, but you know, the engineers, the skill set is changing. You need to be able to understand communications. You need to be able to understand, you know, software programming, in addition to your you know, electrical engineering, physics. So, but I think the utilities recognize this gap, and they're working to retrain and also to create a pipeline of future workers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, good. Those are great closing remarks. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We are delighted. John, do you have a guitar? Take us away.
I'll take you away.
Gary, thank you for being with us.
Gary, excellent, very interesting and very complete.
Again, thank you. I enjoyed the discussion, and Andre, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Photographs and memories, Christmas cards you sent to me, all that I have are these. Remember you, memories that come at night, Take me to an early time, back to a happier day, when I call her mine.
Excellent, excellent, John. Thank you very much,
Okay.
sir. Kudos, kudos.
All right. Take care. Great. Gary, that was wonderful. That's wonderful.